What is going on, you guys? This is DerekJ Speaks, and we are here to talk about the final AEW pay-per-view of 2025, that being World's End, live from the Now Center in Chicago, Illinois, or just outside Chicago, Illinois. And this show was built heavily around the conclusion of this year's Continental Classic. We had the two semifinals matches and, of course, the finals being contested for the Continental Championship itself. Also had a big main event, fatal four-way match for the Men's World Championship. And in both instances, we have two brand new champions coming out of this show, that being Jon Moxley and MJF, both winning their respective championships. MJF walks out of that four-way main event as the brand new and two-time World Heavyweight Champion, and Jon Moxley is the man to stand tall at the end of a grueling month-long tournament to capture the Continental Championship. And color me shocked, at least in the Moxley case. MJF winning the championship, not a surprise at all to me. Of course, he outlasted Hangman Page, Swerve, Strickland, and former champion Samoa Joe. And the match itself, very fun way to close the show. It was a standard fatal four-way match. I remember there being a four-way that closed out the World's End pay-per-view last year. And from what I remember about that match, this match was far better than that one. Had a lot more star power. The crowd was far more into it, and the crowd was not into everything on this show, but at least not like super duper hyped for every single thing on this show. But the main event, they were really into it, especially MJF. They really played along with a lot of his shenanigans. Everybody had a chance to shine in this match. Of course, we had some interaction with Swerve and Hangman. Not only did the two of them team up during this match, but of course they had no hesitation in fighting each other. Joe was great as always. MJF, he is what he is, always good in the ring. Of course, we had some interference from the Ops, Katsuyori Shibata, Powerhouse Hobbs, and Hook. They ran interference at a certain point in this match, almost helped Joe secure a victory, but they did not succeed. Swerve took out some of them. Hook ended up getting taken out at one point, and eventually they got taken away by referees and security, even though this is a no DQ match, so technically they could have stayed out there, but it is what it is. But the big closing moments of the match was everyone getting their licks in on Samoa Joe. We had Swerve hit him with a powerbomb off the middle turnbuckle, and he went up top looking to hit him with a Swerve stomp, but then MJF got up and shoved him right off the top turnbuckle, crashing all the way down to the floor. And Swerve is coming off of knee surgery, so seeing him kind of selling the knee and rubbing his knee afterwards, a little concerning. Hopefully it's nothing, but stay tuned into that. And then MJF got taken down, and that left Hangman to deliver two buckshot lariats to Samoa Joe. Hit him with one, hit him with a second one, and then as he came off the ropes, off the apron to hit him with a third one, MJF shoved Joe out of the way and kicked Hangman right in the dick. Down goes Hangman, and then MJF quickly scurries over to the other side, hits Joe with the Heat Seeker, and he gets the win. And MJF is a two-time world champion, not even 30 years old yet, and there you go. I know a lot of the discourse around MJF these days can be a little bit mixed. I mean, it always has been, but at this point in his career, a lot of people have begun to turn on him. They call him a one-trick pony. He, always goes for the low-hanging fruit. His character's one-dimensional. He hasn't really evolved much. He's still basically the same character that he was when AEW first started. There hasn't been a whole lot to change about him. I disagree in that there are subtle changes here and there. He's not so much of a chicken shit every single time. Case in point, him even involving himself in this match, which I knew as soon as he cashed in his Casino Gauntlet contract that he had to be the one to win this match. So that was not much of a shock to me. And, you know, MJF, he's been phased down a lot this year. He hasn't done a whole lot of remarkable things. He started off the year in a feud with Jeff Jarrett, of all people, and that completely fizzled out. He had a couple of matches with Hangman, and of course the whole business with the Hurt Syndicate that went nowhere, that got dropped, and then the back and forth with him and Mark Briscoe carried on for a few months, and in between there, he took some time off to film a few movies. So, you know, MJF hasn't been a very prominently featured player on the show. But now, as we end the year, heading into the brand new year, 2026, MJF is once again a world champion, capturing the title on the very show that he lost that championship 2 years ago. That was that whole Adam Cole devil reveal stuff that went down. But on that show, MJF lost his championship to Samoa Joe. So it's very fitting and appropriate that on this night, he not only won his championship back on this very same show, but he beat Samoa Joe to do it. And as for his future, I assume we might get a match with him and Hangman at some point in the future, considering the fact that all the previous encounters the two of them had, it was Hangman who came out as the victor. So I assume MJF will probably get his win back. One of the big matches I'm looking forward to and hope they build up to in the future is MJF and Swerve Strickland. That can be a very big marquee match to build to, probably for Revolution or even Double or Nothing next year. That's a big match to set up in the future. Of course, Darby Allin is still out there. I have to assume at some point he's going to get his hands on that world championship. A heel like MJF would be the perfect person for Darby to take that belt from. And of course, long term, I can see and envision a scenario where Will Ospreay makes a miraculous return from his neck injury and he comes back in time to challenge MJF in the main event of All In at Wembley Stadium next August and wins his first world title in London. I think that would be a great story to tell, but that really depends on how well Will Ospreay will recover from his injury. So keep tabs on that. We'll see what goes down there. But for me, personally, I'm excited. Hopefully MJF can remain a strong enough presence on the show. During his last run as champion, it kind of went up and down. So hopefully he can remain a big presence on the show. He's a welcome addition to the show. The show each week can be very hot and cold, but having MJF and have the show built around him as world champion should hopefully do a lot to make it at least a little more interesting. But like I said, MJF was not the only brand new champion on this show. Jon Moxley won that championship, and that was after 3 remaining matches in this year's Continental Classic, which overall was a very good tournament. All these tournaments that they've done so far, the C2 for the past couple of years, has been very good. It's made for a very consistent period of good TV shows for nothing else other than getting really good matches in this tournament between Dynamite and Collision. Hell, it gives me a reason to pay a little bit closer attention to Collision, which AEW doesn't really give me a whole lot of incentive to do so otherwise, so that's good. But heading into this show, we had 2 semifinal matches. The first one actually opened the show, that being Konosuke Takeshita taking on Kazuchika Okada, a match that has been very subtly teased and built up for many, many months now, and we got it in the semifinal, a match that could have, on any other day, been the finals of this tournament, or could have been presented as an even bigger deal of a match But the way I looked at it is that this was going to be the first match in what will hopefully be a series of matches that these two will have over the course of the next year, or at least coming months. Because for what they did on this show, it was a very, very good match, but you could tell they were holding a lot back. A lot of factors could have played into that. Maybe I'm wrong, and that was the best that they could possibly do. They put everything into that match. Just watching it, and me being a fan of both guys, I could tell they were holding back a little bit. They had some flurries. They had some great, chemistry between the two of them, but I could tell that things were being held back a little bit. And like I said, for a multitude of reasons. One being that this is the first match in a series of matches between these two men in particular. I suspect that with the outcome being what it was here, we're going to get a rematch in the future. So this series, I'm sure, will get better. Okada had to wrestle twice on this show because he did win here. So, and it didn't really matter who won. One of these men were going to have to wrestle another match later on in the night. So they weren't going to go completely balls out in this match and not have a whole lot left to give in the last match. Although I guess it's up for debate whether they did or not, but we'll get to that later. And then also keep in mind that both of these men are in the two big main event matches for next week's New Japan show, that being Wrestle Kingdom on January 4th. Both men are involved in very big matches. Konosuke Takeshita, of course, is defending the IWGP Championship against Yota Tsuji, and Okada is Tanahashi's final opponent in his big retirement match. That's the big main event closing match on that show. Those are your two most hyped up main event matches on that show. So I imagine New Japan was going to hope that both of these guys were coming out of this match unscathed. So that's what we got here. But like I said, the match itself was good. The finish was not. We had a case here where Okada had to resort to cheating in order to beat Takeshita. While the referee had his back turned, we saw Okada fumbling around with the turnbuckle pads, and he pulled out a screwdriver, and behind the referee's back, he jammed that screwdriver right into Takeshita's head. You can't see it, but I'm using very hard air quotes when I said behind the referee's back, because it looked like a blown spot where the referee, I believe it was Paul Turner, he looked like he was out of position, and he looked like he was in a position to have clearly seen Okada at least holding the screwdriver. He turned around and played dumb. It made him look very foolish, but he put himself in a position where he could not see Okada using it, but the camera caught it, and it very clearly looked like the referee saw blatantly that Okada had the screwdriver in his hand. I don't know how that was supposed to go, but it didn't come off all that well. But Okada did get the win here. Takeshita, of course, very upset. So that's that. But the next match. Now, heading into this show, I never would have expected anything less than greatness from Takeshita and Okada. And seeing the other semifinal match of Kyle Fletcher and Jon Moxley, I would look at that like, well, take it or leave it. I'm sure there'll be a good matchup. It is what it is, but my attention's on that Takeshita Okada match. That's going to be like match of the year caliber type stuff. But color me shocked that coming out of these two matches, the one that really stole the show, and to me, in my humble opinion, probably was the best match, not only of between the two semifinal matches, but one of the best matches on the entire show, turned out to be the one between Jon Moxley and Kyle Fletcher. I thought these two had a great match here, and they told a very good story with Jon Moxley fighting through an ankle injury and his very sudden, or I guess slow burnt ascension back to being a babyface is what you can really call it. He's been portraying himself more and more of an underdog, valiantly fighting babyface over the course of this tournament, stemming from all the times that he was giving up and tapping out against Darby Allin and Kyle Fletcher. It looked like here that he was, over the course of this tournament, trying to fight through the losses and keep coming back and getting back up and dusting himself off, really putting over how great this tournament is and how it really tests your will and your might and your strengths, and how it's just the best example of pro wrestling at its finest and all this stuff. So Jon Moxley has really been becoming more and more of a babyface again, and the fans over the course of this match really treated him as such. Kyle Fletcher was the very clear-cut villain in this match, taking shortcuts and targeting Moxley's injury, and Mox was the valiant babyface fighting back through all of it and fighting through this adversity. And even at the finish, where Moxley was able to eke out a victory after the match, Kyle Fletcher gave him a chop block and once again went after his injured knee. After Mox put him in a sleeper and Fletcher, he didn't tap, he passed out. He woke up a little quickly, a little too quick for my liking, but it is what it is. But he woke back up, he was pissed off, and he ended up taking out Moxley's ankle again. And so that left him with another handicap heading into the finals between Okada and Jon Moxley. What we found out was the first ever one-on-one encounter between these two men. And they proceeded to have a good match, but not great. One of the aspects of the Okada Takeshita match is that it started very slow, but it started to pick up. And by the end there, even with the lame finish, by the end they really started amping things up and stuff was getting really fun. In the Okada Moxley match, it started off very slow, came up here and there, but then remained pretty slow throughout majority of it, and then kind of a little came up towards the end, but then before you knew it, the match was over. And so that was not great. Kind of ended this tournament, which overall has been great. Some great matches all throughout this tournament, especially from one Kyle Fletcher. He was the MVP of this tournament. I think damn near every single match that boy had throughout this entire tournament was excellent. The match on this show with Moxley, he had a match with Okada, a match with Speedball, a match with Kevin Knight. All these matches that he had over the course of this tournament were incredible. And props to Kyle Fletcher. He is going to be set up for some big things in 2026 if Tony Khan knows what he's doing. But so we've had some great matches over the course of this tournament in both leagues, but for it to all build up to this final, I just thought as a match alone, it was fine, but being the finale of this big tournament kind of made it a little underwhelming. And the finish itself was very underwhelming because the finish saw Jon Moxley win. And I'll give him credit that I did not see it coming. Now, Jon Moxley's one of those characters where you can't be too shocked at the idea of him winning because he has been protected and presented as a big enough star in this company to know that if he's in a big matchup, the chances of him winning are very high. But with the way this tournament was set up, I just never imagined Jon Moxley would be the one to come out as the winner. So that completely took me off guard here and left me a little disappointed. I'm one of the ones, I know the feelings of the Death Riders is very split among the fans and especially the AEW sickos who really, a lot of them really do love Jon Moxley and they love the Death Riders. I was one of the people who have been in favor of heading in and shifting a new gear with this story and starting the direction of the downfall of this group and if not a complete dissolution of the entire group, at least kind of pushing Jon Moxley out of it, maybe in favor of Claudio or Pac or even Marina, and just telling that story of Moxley failing them over and over again as a leader to the point where they get sick and tired of him and they dump him out and they cast him aside. That's not the direction they went in. In fact, they went the complete opposite in this case by not only having Jon Moxley triumphantly leave this tournament as a winner, but he won a championship. So now the year will end the same way it started, with Jon Moxley leading the Death Riders as a champion. Let's just hope we can actually see the belt this time. I don't hate it. I mean, it is what it is. I had my idea of what story I wanted to see. Clearly, Tony Khan has different ideas, and based on some of the comments that I was seeing from a lot of people on at least my timeline and among the people talking about this show on X, a lot of people seem to be very happy with this outcome. There's a lot of Jon Moxley fans. They're happy to see him as a champion again. They're happy to see him as a babyface, which, if heading into this match, it didn't seem like he was in that direction. His post-match promo, where he was putting over the other wrestlers in this tournament and putting over professional wrestling and the fans who love professional wrestling, that sure did sound like babyface Jon Moxley. That's a lot of the promos that he would cut back when he was a babyface a couple of years ago. So that's the idea that I had here. I don't know what that means for the entire group. They're clearly still heels, as evidenced by the match they had earlier in the night on this show. So we'll see where they're going with this. Could there still be a chance that they'll kick him out? Maybe. I don't know. I have to imagine it will happen at some point. I just don't know when that'll be. So I'm not sure. I will continue to pay attention. I'm intrigued by this babyface Jon Moxley thing. Maybe it'll be a thing where he'll be the babyface and the rest of the group are heels, and he notices and picks up on how they're still doing a lot of their heelish stuff, and he doesn't necessarily approve of it anymore, and there's a disconnect there. Maybe that's something that'll be set up. I don't know. So we'll see where that heads in the near future. Another big thing coming out of this is that this entire tournament for the Continental Championship has been for just that, the Continental Championship. One half of the championships that were unified at All In earlier this year to create the Unified Championship. So now you have, which is a big reason why I wanted Okada to win this whole thing, because it's like, well, Okada can win and retain his Continental Championship, and we don't have to deal with the messiness of de-unifying these championships. But now they went and de-unified these championships. Okada has lost his Continental Championship, but he is still the International Champion. Jon Moxley now holds the Continental Championship. MJF, new World Heavyweight Champion. Mark Briscoe, TNT Champion. We have a National Champion with Ricochet. We now, at this moment, have a National Champion and an International Champion. There are 5 singles championships for the men, at a time where the Ring of Honor World Champion, Bandito, frequently wrestles on this show. So that's very weird. That's a very odd decision. It was an odd decision to even have only the Continental Championship defended in this tournament when it probably should have been the unified title. But it was a weird decision for them to not completely abandon one of those championships when they unified that title. I guess the idea is that only when you hold both of the international title and the continental title together, that is the unified champion. That is what that belt represents, but they can be de-unified and defended separately at any time. Hence what happened here. If we're being really honest, I thought it was a mistake when they introduced the concept of the Continental Classic that they had to feel the need to introduce a brand new championship in general. This entire tournament should have just been a number one contender for the world championship type of tournament, where the winner of this tournament gets a shot at the world champion at whether it's Revolution or a big show over the next month or so. That's what it should have been. But we're way past that now. Maybe next year after that, in the future, we can revisit that. But for right now, I don't know. At a time where I thought at one point this year we were going to start decreasing the amount of championships in this company, we now are at a point where we have more than ever before. And what was once the unified title is no longer unified, and now it is once again two separate championships represented by two separate individuals. And after introducing the national title, and then they brought in the women's tag team titles, it's just too much. Everyone gets a belt. Meanwhile, they have people on this show holding championships from other companies and countries. Claudio is the CMLL World Champion. Takeshita, at least for now, is still the IWGP Champion. Like I said, Bandito, Ring of Honor World Champion. Mercedes, need I say more? There's too many damn belts on this show. And this show is still too long. I mean, that's not relevant, but I need to still say that. But that's where we are. For a tournament where I thought the big story coming out of it was going to be the further development of the Takeshita-Okada feud and maybe even the downfall of the Death Riders, it turns out the big payoff to this whole tournament was the complete opposite, where it only strengthened the Death Riders even more, and it turned Jon Moxley into the biggest babyface in the world. So we'll see what comes out of this. As for the rest of the show, we had some more good stuff. We had a Chicago street fight for the tag team titles. Fine match. I mean, your usual plunder, the weapons, the garbage, the chairs and tables. The tables sometimes breaking, sometimes not. We had fire extinguishers and things like that. They really focused in on Juice Robinson's surgically repaired knee, and that was his downfall. And it was never in doubt that FTR was going to win this match. I feel like that played a big part in the crowd reaction to this match, because it just never felt like anyone was fully invested in the idea that Juice Robinson and Austin Gunn were going to win the tag team titles. So they lost, of course, after Juice got laid out with two different assisted pile drivers, one of them being on top of one half of the tag team title belts. So FTR, still your champions. The women's tag team titles were on the line on this show too. The Babes of Wrath successfully defending their titles against Mercedes Moné and Athena in what turned out to be a pretty fun match. Harley Cameron and Willow Nightingale, they have been a fun pairing, and I like seeing them together as tag team champions. The inaugural tag team champions. Would have hated to see them lose their titles in their very first defense, so I'm glad that they not only won, but it was Willow who scored the pinfall on Mercedes to retain the title. So that was good. And this set up a backstage segment later on in the show where Mercedes went back to her locker room, had a big crash out, and challenged Willow to a match on this week's upcoming episode of Dynamite. Even said she'd beat her fucking ass. We had a lot of people dropping the F-bomb all across this show. Moxley and his little babyface promo talked about how, this is the best fucking wrestling company in the world and all that kind of stuff. MJF was dropping F-bombs at the end of the show, talking about how he's the best in the fucking world and stuff like that. So, found that funny. But we are getting a TBS championship match between Willow Nightingale and Mercedes this week on TV. Would they have the balls to take the championship away from Mercedes on the very last show of the year? I don't know. We had Gabe Kidd and Darby Allin in a match on this show. Came out of nowhere. It really only... The story for this particular match only really developed on the two back-to-back shows the previous week, or earlier this week, I should say, the two holiday shows. And I mean, it was fine. These two were clearly going out there to have a brawl. Both men were bloodied, and I'm just like, was that necessary? was that really necessary? I didn't think it was, but I mean, hey, they did what they did, so good for them, I guess. I am just at a point in this company where I see this blood and it just doesn't mean anything to me. These guys go out there and in this match, Gabe Kidd just face covered in blood, and it's like, for what? What kind of rivalry do these... I mean, I guess when you look at it on paper, Gabe Kidd lit the flame for the table that Pac threw him off or threw him through when Darby went through that flaming table during Blood and Guts. It was Gabe Kidd who lit the match. Darby put Gabe Kidd in a body bag and chained it up to his car and drove off with him. And of course, Gabe Kidd has been aligned with the Death Riders for months and months now, and Darby is still at war with them to one degree or another. So on paper, there looks to be a backstory, but for this match and for the sake of, investment and television time dedicated to it, it really did not need all the blood and gore here. But Darby got the win, very predictable outcome, and we move on. And we move on to one of the more fun things that happened on this show, Mixed Nuts Mayhem. I forgot to write down what the sponsor of this match was. This match did have a sponsor of some kind, so I assume that had something to do with the name. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was just Tony Khan giving this a crazy name because this was supposed to be a crazy match. It was an 8-person mixed tag team match. The Death Riders on one side with Claudio, Wheeler Yuta, Daniel Garcia, and Marina Shafir taking on Orange Cassidy, Mark Briscoe, Roderick Strong, and Tony Storm. And this was a pretty fun match. It was filler, obviously, but it was something nice in the middle of the show, and the crowd popped for a lot of things that happened during the course of this match. At several points, the heels, especially the men, kept trying to attack Tony Storm, and every time they did or held her or something like that and tried to do some kind of offensive maneuver on her, the fans would rise up and they would get really invested, and of course one of the babyface guys would come in and stop it. Eventually Tony pushed her luck and she ended up getting swung by Claudio for a little bit, so that was funny. At one point, Orange Cassidy and Tony Storm were delivering offense and hitting people with moves, but all the while they were dancing and doing, a form of the tango. And so like someone would spin the other and like they would hit a spinning back fist on someone. They would do all this stuff and kick someone. It was a lot better than what I'm describing. Clearly I know I'm an expert in the tango here, but I thought that was a really fun sequence. The fans really liked it. And the fans were really popping for the interaction with Tony Storm and Orange Cassidy all throughout this match and even in the post-match. We had husband and wife against each other at one point where Roderick Strong on one side and Marina Shafir on the other. They came face to face. I thought that was really cool. Again, another moment that got a rise out of the crowd. I thought they were going to do more than they did, but they did not. But it was still funny. But in the end, it was Mark Briscoe hitting the J Driller on Wheeler Yuta to get the win for the babyfaces. And of course, Tony was celebrating with them. Mina Shirakawa and Luther came out. The rest of the conglomeration came out. So it was one big party. And like I said, complete filler, but harmless fun. They didn't go too crazy with it with the whole Mixed Nuts Mayhem tagline. I was expecting another bloodbath here, but it wasn't really like that. They did get the weapons and some of that kind of stuff in here, but it was nothing too crazy. So, like I said, something fun. And speaking of fun, we also had a fun Women's World Championship match between Chris Statlander and Jamie Hayter. Again, another match on the show that kind of just was announced and made official. Like, here you go. And I don't always hate that, Sometimes Wrestler A challenging Wrestler B for their championship is all you need. But sometimes I do like to have a little bit more story for it, especially when it's two very popular names like Jamie Hayter and Chris Statlander. But be that as it may, they went out there and had another really good match. The crowd, yet again, for a pay-per-view match with Chris Statlander, like, they were into some of the stuff, but they were very quiet for a good chunk of the match. We saw this at the previous pay-per-view with Mercedes in that match, which was also really good. We saw it in the Chris Statlander match with Tony Storm at Wrestle Dream, where they were quiet for a good chunk of that match, but it was still a very good match. So I don't know what the deal is with these cards. I don't know if it's the placement of the matches. I don't get it. Chicago, or whatever this city in Illinois is that this show took place, they're usually really rowdy and raucous for these wrestling shows, but I don't know, sometimes on these pay-per-views, even in the biggest wrestling cities, the shows just go on a little too long, these matches go a little too long. But even in among the opening matches, they were kind of quiet for some of that stuff too. It really took some big things to get them really, really invested here. So, but by this point in the show, when this match taking place as late as it did, I imagine they were starting to get a little burned out, and they were, about to see the big main event with all the big main event guys in there. They're going to see the finals of this tournament. So, it is what it is. But I thought these two had a really good match, and the fans weren't sitting on their hands for the entire thing. They did wake up for some of the stuff that they were doing, and they were into it. And they had some pretty good back and forth sequences. At one point, they were hitting a series of counter moves on each other, and both went down. And of course, the fans popped for it. They had a big applause for everything they were doing. Both women were trying each other's finishers. At one point, it looked like Chris was about to hit a haterade of her own on Jamie, but it did not work out for her. Jamie tried to hit one. Chris Statlander actually spat in her face, and that pissed off Jamie, so she went to deliver her clothesline, but then Chris ended up hitting her with the haterade clothesline, and then she tried to hit her with Saturday Night Fever. Jamie instead hit her with it, but then Chris kicked out, and then all the way down to the stretch, it's Chris who ended up hitting her finisher, Saturday Night Fever, to get the clean win and retain her championship. Like I said, very good matchup. I would love to see it again with proper build-up and enough, push behind it. I could get behind Jamie Hayter winning back that championship. I would love to see her put in a position to once again be Women's World Champion. She was such a hot act on the show a few years ago, and then that back injury really took her out of the game for a very long time, and they brought her back, but she just hasn't really recaptured that magic that she had. And the booking of her and her character hasn't really done a whole lot to recapture that spark. So it is what it is. But maybe if they put enough time in investing in her character, maybe we can get to that point, and the idea of her winning that world championship will actually feel really special. But till then, we have matches like this, which were very good. And that closes out my discussion of what overall, top to bottom, was a very strong show. One of the stronger shows that they've had in recent months. The tail end of this year hasn't had some of the strongest AEW pay-per-views. I would argue they've been some of the weaker ones. Full Gear, Wrestle Dream, All Out, some of the weaker pay-per-views. Not bad. We've seen very few bad pay-per-views from AEW in their 6-year history. This show I would definitely not call bad. It wasn't great. Some of the great shows this year, All In, Double or Nothing, Revolution, aside from the shitty finish on that show. We've had some really good shows this year, but we've also had some kind of mediocre, so-so, ho-hum shows. And this falls slightly in that category, but just maybe a few notches above it. But, it is what it is. Hopefully AEW can get their act together heading into the new year, can put on some really good shows, can develop some really good stories. It's not that they don't tell stories. It's just that some of their stories aren't told well. So hopefully they can improve that. I'm not here to talk about ratings and all that crap. That doesn't concern me. I just want this company to succeed. So I want them to go out there and make some stories, make some drama, and do things that really gets people talking about them. It really gets people investing in spending time every single week, every Wednesday, every Saturday, these months where they have these pay-per-views and forking down money to buy these shows and really be hyped up and excited for these shows. You know, we really haven't had that a lot in recent memory, at least in my opinion. So I hope they can recapture that. Whether they do or not, that's up to them. And you will have a lot of fans who say that they did have that this year and this was one of their best years. I don't necessarily agree with that take, but I don't think it was a horrible, god-awful year either. Same goes for WWE. Both companies had their moments this year. They had their highs, had many, many, many lows in terms of creative and entertainment value, but all I can do is just hope for the best. And if you are someone who thought this was a great year for either company, all I'll say to you is, well, I hope 2026 is even better. Just like I hope it's even better for you, and I hope it's even better for me. And thank you for listening to me. And if you liked what you heard from me, you like what you hear, like what you see, hit that like button, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And of course, follow me on Twitter/X at DerekJ Speaks. Stay tuned to this channel in the next few days because I will be pumping out once again my top 20 favorite matches of the year 2025. I'll be running down that entire list, giving some honorable mentions, and we will determine what the best match, in my opinion, was of 2025. At least what the best match I saw was. So keep tabs on that. Keep an eye out. That should be coming out in the next few days. I have a lot of homework and matches to rewatch, some for the first time. So we'll see how that shapes out. But until then, thank you guys. Happy holidays and check you later.